At first, they thought it was blood, but the smell was wrong, too thick, too heavy, almost industrial, as if crude oil had been spilled inside the frozen walls of a mountain monastery. The black liquid crept slowly down the face of the ancient icon, leaving glossy trails, and none of the monks dared wipe it away, because it felt as though it was watching them in return. The monastery in Svanity stood at the edge of the world, wedged between jagged stone peaks, where the wind sounded like chujoid dichania, like something breathing that did not belong there. In the winter of 1921, an avalanche came down with such sudden force that within minutes it cut the monastery off from everything, burying the only road beneath layers of snow and ice. Inside, a few dozen monks remained. Their supplies would barely last weeks, and the cold pressed through even the thick, smoke-soaked walls. That was when they found the icon. It stood inside a sealed chapel that had not been opened in years, avoided because of a strange story passed down through generations. It was said the icon had been brought there long before the monastery itself was built, and even then it had been kept hidden. When the doors were finally opened, the air inside felt warm, unnaturally so thick and almost damp, as if the room had been breathing on its own despite the frozen world outside. The icon depicted a saint, but the face was wrong, too lifelike, too detailed. The eyes seemed wet even before anything had happened before what would later be called a miracle. That same night, one of the monks noticed a dark drop forming on the saint's chin. It swelled slowly, trembling, then fell onto the stone floor with a dull, heavy sound that didn't match its size. By morning, the icon was weeping. The black myrrh flowed slowly, thick as tar, collecting in bowls hastily placed beneath it. The smell was strange, a mix of earth, iron, and something else, faint but deeply unsettling, like the air before a storm. The monks prayed, believing it to be a sign, a trial, or a blessing, but no one could explain why the liquid left a lingering warmth on the skin, as if it were seeping inward. When one of the brothers fell gravely ill, his body burning, his breath breaking apart, his eyes no longer focusing, the decision did not come from faith, but from desperation. A single drop of the myrrh was placed on his lips. He swallowed it, and for a moment the chapel fell so silent that the slow dripping from the icon could be heard echoing against the stone. By morning he stood. The illness was gone completely, as if it had never existed. His skin was smooth, his breathing steady, and his eyes held a strange brightness too sharp for someone who had been at the edge of death just hours before. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Doubt gave way to awe. Very quickly, the black myrrh became a gift. Each suffering monk received a drop. The weak rose to their feet, the exhausted filled with strength, and the old began to move with unexpected ease. In the sealed isolation of the monastery, cut off from the world, it felt like salvation, a sign they had not been abandoned. But something else came with it. At night, more footsteps echoed through the corridors than there were men living within those walls. The smell of the oil seeped into the stone, into their clothes, into the air itself, becoming suffocating and impossible to escape. Those who had taken the myrrh began waking in the darkness, clutching their chests, as if something new was beating inside them, something heavy, slow, and wrong. The icon continued to weep without pause, and its face began to change in subtle ways. The lines softened, the gaze deepened, there was something almost satisfied in its expression. At times it seemed the dark liquid was not coming from the eyes at all, but from somewhere beneath the paint, as if something alive was pressing outward, trying to break through. The first man who was healed became the first to change. He no longer shivered in the cold, even as the others wrapped themselves in wool and huddled near the fire. His skin remained warm, almost hot, and if one looked closely, thin dark lines could be seen beneath it, like veins, but too black, too dense, as if something thicker than blood flowed inside them. And once, when he ran his tongue across his lips, where the faint taste of oil still lingered, something flashed in his eyes. Hunger. Not human, not understandable, but no longer hidden. And still, the monastery believed it had witnessed a miracle. That belief would become the beginning of something no one would later dare to call either salvation or curse. The change did not arrive all at once. It spread quietly, like the oil itself, slow, deliberate, impossible to contain once it had touched something living. At first, it was only the healed. They moved differently, not stronger in any obvious way, but more certain, as if their bodies no longer hesitated. Their steps grew precise, their movements economical, almost rehearsed. They stopped complaining about the cold entirely, even as frost gathered along the inner walls, and the remaining monks slept in layers of wool and animal skin. The fire no longer drew them in. They sat apart from it, watching the flames with a distant, unreadable focus. Then came the appetite. It began as a discomfort no one could explain. The monks who had taken the myrrh started refusing bread, then broth, then even water. They described no pain, only a growing dissatisfaction, as if ordinary food had lost something essential. Their bodies did not weaken. On the contrary, their faces grew fuller, their posture more upright, their eyes clearer, too clear, reflecting light with an unnatural sharpness that made others uneasy. The monastery's cellar still held salted meat, carefully rationed for the winter, but even that began to spoil in their mouths. Those who ate it gagged or turned away, their expressions tightening in quiet frustration. Something inside them rejected it completely. At night, the sounds changed. The corridors had always creaked and whispered with wind, but now there were new noises, wet, subtle, almost organic. A faint dragging, a slow, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to come not from the walls, but from within them. The monks who had not taken the myrrh began waking at the same hour, unable to explain why, their hearts racing as if responding to a signal they could not hear. And always beneath it all, the dripping. The icon had not stopped. The bowls filled faster now. The black liquid thickened, darkening further until it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. When poured, it stretched in heavy strands before breaking, like something alive resisting separation. The smell intensified, sinking deeper into the lungs, leaving a metallic aftertaste that lingered for hours. One by one, more monks chose to take it. Not out of faith anymore, but out of fear. The healed no longer looked like men who had been saved. They looked complete in a way the others were not. Untouched by exhaustion, untouched by cold, untouched by doubt. To remain unchanged in their presence began to feel like decay. Within days, most had taken at least a single drop. That was when the veins appeared. At first, they were faint, thin shadows beneath the skin, barely visible unless the light struck at the right angle. But they darkened quickly, spreading along the arms, across the neck, threading through the temples like ink injected directly into the body. They pulsed slowly, not in time with the heartbeat, but with something heavier, more deliberate. The monks stopped praying together. Not by decision, but by drift. They gathered less often, spoke less, avoided one another's eyes. The chapel, once the center of their lives, became something else entirely, a place of quiet gravity, where the icon drew them back again and again, not for worship, but for something closer to need. The first death came without warning. One of the older monks, who had refused the myrrh, was found in his cell before dawn. There were no signs of struggle, no wounds that could explain it, and yet his body looked emptied. His skin had collapsed slightly against the bone, his color drained to a pale gray, as though something vital had been taken from him without leaving a trace behind. No one spoke of it directly. But that same day, the healed began to change more visibly. Their movements slowed, not from weakness, but from restraint. Their breathing deepened. Their eyes lingered too long on the living. When they stood near others, There was a tension in the air, a quiet, unbearable pressure, like the moment before something breaks. And still the icon wept. Its face had shifted further now. The saint's expression no longer resembled sorrow. The lips seemed softer, almost curved. The eyes, once solemn, now held a depth that suggested recognition, as if it were no longer observing, but remembering. The monastery, buried beneath snow and silence, had become something closed in on itself. A system, a cycle. The oil flowed, the bodies changed, the hunger grew. And somewhere within those stone walls, something patient was learning how to live again, one vein, one breath, one drop at a time.